Welcome to Midlife, Interrupted and Unfiltered.
I'm Melissa, coach, counselor, and professional truth bringer.
And I'm Ann, trial lawyer, accountability partner, and certified Pilates instructor. That's for real.
We're two East Coast women who met at a kindergarten drop-off.
And 15 years later decided midlife needed a megaphone and not a mute button.
So we're here to interrupt the negative narratives
and share the unfiltered truth about reinvention, perimenopause, and everything in between. Just real talk. Let's go. So welcome, everybody, to episode 11 of Midlife, Interrupted and Unfiltered, the podcast where midlife is not a crisis, it's a power move.
Exactly. And we're here for those women who have built careers, raised little people, managed households, survived office politics, and reinvented themselves at least twice, and are now asking, wait, is this really what I want to keep doing?
So today's episode we're calling Making the Career Leap Without Losing Your Mind. Because let's be honest, wanting a new chapter is really exciting, but actually making the leap, that can feel equal parts thrilling, terrifying, long overdue, yet wildly inconvenient.
And I'd say, especially when you're not 22 and living on ramen and optimism. So these midlife career changes come with actual mortgages, maybe aging parents, maybe college kids, teenagers, perimenopause, long resumes, and a deeply developed ability to catastrophize at 3 a.m. with anxiety.
So real. So today we're talking about how to make a career leap in a way that is brave and sane, not perfect, but real.
So we're going to cover some mindset shifts, right? The practical steps and how to stop yourself from spiraling every time you update LinkedIn.
So let's start with why midlife women feel the career itch. So let's start with that. If you're feeling restless, that does not mean you're ungrateful, and it doesn't mean you're flaky, and it definitely does not mean that you've missed your chance.
Right. Sometimes that career itch shows up because you've outgrown the role. Sometimes the industry has changed. Sometimes you've actually changed. And sometimes you wake up one day and realize you spent years being competent in a life that no longer feels like yours.
And that is such a midlife moment, right? You look around and you think, I can do this job. I'm not sure, though, that I want to anymore.
And midlife has a way of stripping away your tolerance for nonsense, as we've talked about in the past. You become much less willing to spend your remaining working years exhausted, underpaid, invisible, and chronically bored. And let me tell you something, everyone, that's not selfish. That is wisdom.
So the biggest myth, let's talk about that. I have to blow up my whole life. No. One of the biggest reasons women stay stuck is because they think a career leap has to be dramatic.
We like drama, but not here. This would be, oh my gosh, I have to quit on a Tuesday, start a candle company by Friday, and somehow become a TED Talk famous person by Monday. No, most healthy career leaps are not giant movie jumps. They're thoughtful pivots and experiments. They're strategic exits, and they're a series of smaller moves that build towards a bigger change.
And that's so important. You do not have to burn your life down to create a new one.
Sometimes the leap might be internal first. And I know I've talked about that on a previous podcast. It's admitting the truth of saying this no longer fits me. I feel like I'm dressing up in a costume. And maybe that comes from experience and time. Maybe you take a course that triggers something in your brain that says, oh, I want to do something different. Maybe it's a conversation with a friend, a side hustle, a networking coffee. Maybe you're rewriting your resume and think, oh, shoot, this is not the stuff that I really want to be doing. Or it could be a financial plan. So many things can impact the idea to take a leap.
What you're saying, Mel, is that a leap can begin as a bridge, right?
Absolutely. And that makes it really challenging.
So let's talk about why this midlife career change is so hard. So let's name what makes it hard, because pretending it's easy doesn't help anybody.
Yes, true. First, of course, there's this identity piece, right? If you've been the reliable one or the expert or the one with the stable job for years, changing your career can feel like stepping out of an armor.
And then there's that fear of starting over. Nobody wants to go from seasoned professional to awkward beginner. And I think we talked about this previously in one of our episodes.
Absolutely, because it's scary to be a beginner. And let's just add that the invisible labor women are already carrying in general, right? You may be making this decision while managing family logistics or emotional labor or maybe health changes and just in general, everybody else's needs.
And then there's also the voice in your head that says, maybe it's too late, and maybe I should be grateful for where I'm at, and maybe this is just as good as it's ever going to get.
To that voice, we say, thank you for trying to protect us. Please have a seat.
That's awesome. And
We don't
because
need you.
because fear's normal, but fear is not always truth.
Right. It's not always true. I think we said before, fear is the opposite of courage. Courage is the opposite of fear, right? So we want to find that courage. So how do we find that courage and how do we leap without losing our minds? So let's get practical.
You're always practical, Mel.
If you're thinking about making a career leap or change, here's a few ways to do it without emotionally free falling. The first and the most important thing is get clear on what you actually want, not what you want to escape. What do you want to move towards? Because I hate my job. That's fine. That's information, but that's not a plan.
So think about, what do I want more of? Do I want more flexibility? Do I want more meaning in my career? Do I want more money? Do I want more creativity, leadership? Do I just want more energy? Do I want a remote work? Do I want a healthier pace? These are all questions that you should be asking yourself to try to get clear on what you actually want.
And also, what am I no longer willing to tolerate? And this question can be just as powerful as, any of the other questions. And I think the other thing you have to do is make sure you separate fantasy from fit. It has to be a realistic thought. It can be crazy and exciting, but it has to be something that you can actually take actions to do.
Sometimes we romanticize a career because we're depleted.
Exactly. And we don't need a fantasy. You don't need a fit. You need just a role that works with your strengths, that fits your values and your season of life, and quite honestly, your nervous system, because your next move doesn't have to impress any strangers on the internet. The only person you have to impress and feel happy with is yourself, and it's your life.
So, how to take this leap? We talked about get clear on what you actually want, then separate fantasy from fit. Third thing, build a runway before you jump. This is the least glamorous advice, and probably, though, the most important.
Yeah. And financial breathing room isn't boring, it's actual freedom.
So, if possible, build up your savings, reduce unnecessary expenses, map out what you need monthly, and think about whether you need additional training, certificates, or a transition period when you're making the career shift.
Peace of mind is a really important part of this strategy. And I'd say the fourth thing after building that runway before you jump, stop calling it starting over. You're not starting over, you're starting from a wealth of experience.
You're bringing judgment, resilience, pattern recognition, communication skills, emotional intelligence, and the kind of maturity that cannot be fast tracked. Even if you change industries, you are not a blank slate. You're a whole portfolio.
Exactly. But stop calling it starting over because you'll hear my voice saying stop. You need to test it before you commit. Before making this huge move, try a low risk experiment. Maybe freelance a little, maybe volunteer, maybe take a class or shadow someone. Start with a little tiny offer, consult, interview people already doing the work, network.
And action reduces anxiety faster than overthinking it ever will. So, the next thing, number 6, is let yourself be bad at something again. And that's a rough one. That's tough.
But it's real. Midlife women, we're so used to being capable, and that beginner energy feels humiliating, but we want to encourage everyone to get exhilarated by it, not humiliated by it.
And every meaningful reinvention requires a season when you're not polished and when you're not the expert.
You're allowed to be in progress. You're allowed to learn in public, privately, slowly, and perfectly, whatever works. Just like Ann, I'd say that we're learning as we do this podcast because it's something new for us.
Totally. Yeah. So you're
So,
allowed to be a work in progress.
absolutely. So, now that we've talked about those, let's just recap those things. What was number one, Anne?
Number one is get clear on what you actually want.
Number two, separate fantasy from fit.
Number three, build a runway before you jump.
Number four, stop calling it starting over.
Number five, test before you commit.
And number six, let yourself be bad at something again.
Let's talk about the emotional side of the leap.
Yeah, the whiplash.
Let's talk about that for a second, because one day you'll feel empowered and visionary, and then the next day you're convinced you should just stay put forever and never have another thought about taking that career leap.
Yep. And that swing, everyone, is so normal. Career change brings grief as well as excitement. And grief for the version who worked so hard to build that current chapter, or grief for the time you spent to get there, or maybe the identity you may be shedding, which we've talked about in previous podcasts. But the grief doesn't mean that you're making the wrong choice. It means you're human and it means it mattered.
And this is where self-compassion has got to be part of the plan, not as a cute idea, but as a concrete operating principle. Sleep matters, boundaries matter, talking to wise friends matter, therapy, coaching, journaling, walking, praying, spreadsheets, honestly, whatever keeps you from making life decisions in a cortisol storm.
That's so true. We all know a regulated woman makes better decisions than a panicked one. That's just science and survival.
Yeah. So take care of yourself, give yourself some grace, and do things that are going to let you operate at a level where you can make good decisions and not in a panic.
And let me just ask though, not in a panic, but what do we say to that inner critic that is be yapping in our ear?
So when your brain says, I'm too old, how does that translate in a positive way, Mel? How can we make that thought a positive
How
one?
can we reframe that? Maybe this feels vulnerable because I can't hide behind my youth anymore.
And what if your brain says, I'm behind?
Maybe it's I'm comparing my life to someone else's Instagram curated timeline.
And what if your brain says, what if I fail?
What if I'm seen as trying?
And that one right there, that one keeps so many brilliant people stuck about what if I fail?
And trying isn't embarrassing. Staying miserable should be embarrassing because you're staying miserable just because you're good at it. And that doesn't mean that you should. And that's the trap. And if you'll remember, what if I'm seen trying? At one point, Anne, when she got her Pilates certification, someone made a comment or something and she said, watch me. And you say, what if I fail? Watch me. That can be your internal voice.
Yeah, of I'm going to make this happen. So let's think about or talk about a gentler way to think about success.
Yeah. And I think the most powerful question we ask in midlife at this point, what does success actually mean to me at this point in my life?
Because that answer is going to be different at 48 or 50 or any midlife age than it was when you asked yourself that question at 28.
It used to mean maybe a title or prestige or hustle or proving yourself, right?
And now maybe it means peace, flexibility, agency, better money for less chaos, work that fits your values, and work that leaves enough of you left for the rest of your life.
And for everyone listening, know that's not lowering the bar, that's refining it and making it better.
So let's talk about some closing takeaways.
I think for all of you listening, if you're listening to this and you're thinking of making a change or standing at the edge of a career leap, here are some of the things we want you to remember. Number one, you're not too late. You're not too old.
And you don't have to have a whole plan before you begin.
And you're not starting from scratch.
And you do not have to sacrifice your mental health in order to reinvent your life.
So,
Action items.
make a spreadsheet, take the class, update the resume, have the conversation, save the money, test the idea, tell the truth, be kind to yourself.
And bravery in midlife doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a woman who's quietly deciding that she deserves a future that fits her better. And honestly, that's a pretty powerful leap. So we'll leave you with those thoughts. Thanks for joining us on Midlife Interrupted and Unfiltered.
If this episode hit home, share it with a friend who needs to hear it.
And subscribe so we can keep interrupting your week with real talk.
Find us on Instagram at the.interruption.
Where we're continuing the conversation and building this community together.
Until next time, keep interrupting those narratives.
And stay unfiltered. See you next week.